So there are three of us from Valve here for this talk, and we're really excited to be connecting with all of you. My name is Kaci Atchison Boyle, and I work primarily in communications for Steam Business and also for some of the other gaming things that we do at Valve. Pretty much as anything we can communicate about, I try to help out with and do. You may have heard that we actually made a pretty big announcement this morning announcing Steam Deck, which we are thumbs up, love it, love it. We are super excited about it. Totally understand that there might be a lot of questions about that today, but we're not really going to have a chance to go too deeply into that. However, we have a brand new website for the device that's pretty awesome and answers a lot of questions up front. It's just steamdeck.com, and we can put that into the chat. And then Erik, who's going to introduce himself here in just a moment, did some great videos that can kind of help guide developers and connect developers to the process, which isn't really much of a process actually of getting things onto Steam Deck. And then Steamworks documentation will have more developer facing information that you'll need. But it's something we're really excited about, and it comes out of us constantly trying to work with developers to see what their needs are and how they want to reach their audiences. And increasingly, we have heard from players and developers that they wanted a way to play their games a little bit more mobily. So we're super excited about it. And we can, throughout the talk, we'll try to reference Steam Deck because almost everything we touch on today will be a benefit for Deck as well. So we'll get into that in just a minute and into the big talk, but you've already heard me babble, and I'm just going to step aside for a second and let Erik and Alden introduce themselves real quick.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Erik. I work on the Steam business team, and I've been at Valve for about 5 years now, almost 6. And my role is I do a bunch of different things. Helping developers to launch their games and market their games on Steam is a big part of what I do. And I also work on kind of developer outreach and helping get information out about how our Steam features work and what we're up to.
Yeah, and my name is Alden Kroll. I've been around Valve for a long time. I'm primarily a designer, but I also work a lot with the business team, work a lot on developer outreach. I primarily work in the design space of the Steam store and the Steam backend developer tools. So thinking through how to best build tools and features that can support you as game developers as you're trying to run your business on Steam and connect with players, and then how those features get surfaced to players on the store and how your games get featured as well.
Great. So we got a lot of really great questions ahead of time. We're going to touch on as many of those as we can, but as we go, I'm sure that a lot of you will have questions that pop up, which is great. If it's the type of question that you feel the audience, the whole group can benefit from, then go ahead and type them into chat in the Zoom call here at any time. And we're going to be keeping track of those, and we'll be making sure to stop down every so often and answer some of those as well. If it's a specific question to your game, to your development process, to you as a developer, that's great too, but go ahead and hold off on those, and we'll have a way at the end of this that we can reinforce that you can reach out to us directly, and we're all super available and happy to help with those questions as well. So before we get to some of the more specific questions, we usually like to start with like an overview of Steam and how it works, just to kind of get everybody onto the same page. So Alden's going to do that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Kaci. Yeah, as we think about the tools and features that we build into Steam, we really have two main audiences in mind, and that is you as game developers, and then players who are going to be buying and playing your game. So we spend a lot of time thinking about both audiences and how we can build features into Steam that make it a great place for players to play games, and then how we can build features and tools for you to be able to run your business and communicate with your audience and build an audience on Steam and be able to run your business the way that that you can most efficiently run your business. And we think about this over the long run. We want to build long-term relationships with fans and with developers and help you all succeed over the long run of making your first game, making your second game, making your 12th game, etc. Unlike other platforms, we don't work in a way where we have secret handshakes that get you featured and highlighted on the front page of the store. We'll go into some more details throughout this talk about how discovery and visibility works on Steam. At a really high level, things get featured on the front page and in a way that is really personalized around each customer. So when I show up to Steam, the front page of the Steam store looks really different for me than it does for Erik and for Kaci, because we play different kinds of games and we follow different developers, we follow different curators. I have different friends that make recommendations to me. Those are all reasons that things show up on the front page of Steam to me, not just because somebody in a room at Valve decided to hit a button to force a game to show up to me. So as we go through this talk, we'll talk about some of the things that you can do as a game developer that will cause your game to show up not just to more people, but to the right people that are likely to buy your game and play your game and have a good experience with it, and how to build a long-term relationship with those fans yourself. Steam is also a global platform. There were a few questions that you submitted about the game industry in Indonesia and customers in Indonesia. And we'll talk a little bit about how we think about Steam as a global platform, and hopefully how you as a game developer can be thinking about who your customers are, wherever they are in the world and whatever language they speak. We go into much more detail. We have actually a YouTube video where we kind of walk through how does the front page of Steam work, and how do games get shown in each of the different sections as you go through the homepage. So we'll drop that link into the chat here so you can check that out when it's convenient for you. I think that wraps up the kind of high level topic. I think we're going to jump right into questions there that kind of feed on that. You all had a lot of great questions about kind of marketing, visibility, discovery. How does that work on Steam? So we'll just start taking some of the questions here. Erik, I think this first one is for you. And the question was, do you have any advice to increase our game's visibility on Steam, or how do you get featured by Steam? And there were a number of questions like that. So why don't you just go ahead and talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all interrelated with what Alden just talked about in just now. And that, first of all, it's important to think about Steam as being customized for everybody who uses it. And every game is going to appear in different spots and to different people based on that customization. And ultimately, and I highly recommend the video that Alden talked about, because it really helps you to understand kind of how Steam works overall. But one important thing to start with is that we don't sell ads on Steam. So when you see games that are featured on Steam, it isn't because they paid us to have them appear there. They're appearing there because they are games that are interesting to players, or that players are reacting to and that they're playing and buying. That is how Steam works. Steam is ultimately designed to react to bursts of customer interest. And how do we measure customer interest? Well, generally speaking, that is measured by game sales, because that's the most concrete way that a customer can tell us that they are interested in a game. That's how we can tell that that's a real interest. And so the store is designed to react to those bursts of customer interest and sales. And really, it's driven by what players are buying and what they are playing. It is not, it is not connected to things like, page visits or click-through rate or impressions. As another question was here, which is that, how important are those metrics for a game, and does that affect the way that my game is featured? And the answer to that is generally not. The way that we measure that is through sales, and generally speaking, those wish lists and click-through rate and page visits don't really factor into visibility on Steam. And when it comes to Steam, it is looking at a number of different things, including those sales, but it also looks at playtime correlations, things like it might be more likely to feature a game to me that my best friend Alden likes to play, and it would show to me, like on the main capsule, what we call like the front page is hey, this is a game that your friends play, or in the tags that are applied to your store page, so that it knows that I like to play MOBA type games. I'm a big MOBA player, and so it's more likely to feature games that are MOBA type games to me, because it knows that that's something that's relevant to me and something that I'm interested in playing. So going back to this original question of do you have any advice to increase our game's visibility on Steam and how to get featured by Steam? Ultimately, my answer to that was, well, it's based off of customer interest. So then the next step in that advice is to really work on generating awareness around your game as a developer. And that can be many different things, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that is really just getting the word out about your game in any way possible. And then that can mean different things for different types of developers. If you're a solo indie dev, that might mean talking to everyone on your Discord and going on Twitter or other social media platforms or Facebook, or just getting the word out about your game and trying to have as many people aware of that game as possible, so that when your game launches, hopefully you've been able to gather a bunch of wish lists, a bunch of people are notified about your game, and there's a burst of activity that a bunch of people who are buying your game. And then, Steam is more likely to refer your game and to show it to more and more people. And that's one way that you can kind of gain additional visibility and recommendations by Steam itself. Hopefully that can kind of help you understand how Steam works. The next question is diving into a little bit greater detail into tags and genres and kind of how that affects visibility. Alden, question is, do tags and genres affect a game's visibility and then ultimately their overall sales?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth kind of backing up a little bit and talking a little bit about kind of cause and effect. We think of store tags as little bits of metadata that should be applied to your store page that accurately reflect the genre, the themes, the styles, the attributes of your game. And those are all used in order for Steam to figure out who are the customers that play games that are tagged with similar kinds of games or tags. And so that has a big impact on who your game shows up to on the front page of Steam, on different genre pages, as people are exploring around Steam. It is important that you make sure that those tags accurately reflect what your game is and what is in your game. If you just try to put on the most popular tags, you'll probably see that backfire in terms of a bunch of people end up on your store page that are confused how they got there and what your game really is. So it is important to make sure that you are able to tag your game accurately. One of the shortcomings, perhaps, of this system is that if you manage to make a game that is truly unlike any other game on Steam, then Steam might have a little bit of a hard time figuring out who to recommend that game to. But I think that's probably also generally a challenge for you as you're figuring out how to market your game and how to talk to customers about what your game is. So it's really important as you're making your game, as you're setting up your store page on Steam, thinking about what are the unique elements of your game and how do you communicate those things to players succinctly so they understand what that game is about, what it's like to play, and then tagging your store page with all of the tags that make sense for your game. And there's a relatively new wizard that we've added to the back end that helps you kind of step through that and say, here's a bunch of different themes. Does your game fall into one of these themes? Here's a bunch of visual styles. Does your game have one or more of these visual styles? So if you haven't gone through that process yet, it's a pretty helpful process and for helping kind of steer you down the path of choosing the things that make sense for your game. The next question, I guess, is kind of a similar kind of question. The question was, does a game's category matter for consideration to be featured on the front page? Do some genres have more advantage compared to other games? Erik, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the answer is a little complicated, but I'll walk through it. So the first question is, does a game's category matter for consideration to be featured in the front page of Steam? The first thing is, ultimately, we aren't curating the front page based off of the specific type of game. It's not like, oh, well, you make a visual novel, so therefore we're not going to show it, or you make an RPG and we're more likely to show it. Actually, all of the front page of Steam, as we've talked about, is personalized for every user. So if you're a user that likes to play visual novels or likes to play action games, you're actually more likely to be suggested those types of games. But ultimately, when it comes to trying to decide as a developer what type of game to make, or whether or not a certain type of game will be more successful than others, it's true there might be more players on Steam who are making first-person shooters or adventure games or role-playing games, very popular genres, but there probably are more games as competition. There are more first-person shooters and role-playing games and action games on Steam. And so, ultimately, trying to follow a trend of a hot, type of game or the flavor of the month or whatever it is type of game that people are really liking, we think that that's a mistake. And we think it's better for you as a developer to develop the game that you are passionate about and that you really believe in and that you can put your heart into, rather than trying to chase a specific genre that you think is really popular, partially because that genre may not be popular by the time you release your game, or you may not be able to make effective game in that genre, ultimately you should just make the game that you believe in. And Steam will try to do its job to try to suggest it to players that it thinks will be interested in that type of game, and that's generally our advice when it comes to trying to target a specific genre on Steam. But ultimately there isn't some it isn't some kind of system where a certain type of game is more likely to get featured than others. It's really just about finding your audience on Steam. So the next question we have is reviews is for Alden, and that's reviews affect the game's chance to be featured on the front page. Do review bombings have this effect too? And maybe here's a chance for you to kind of dispel some rumors, Alden.
Yeah, so the user reviews on a game do have some impact on whether Steam is going to recommend that game, but only below mixed level. So if your game has positive, overwhelmingly positive, very positive, mostly positive, any of those attributes, you're going to be fine. You don't really have to care about the distinction between whether it's overwhelmingly positive or just very positive. Steam treats those almost identically to the point where it really doesn't make any difference. So what you might want to be concerned about, if your game is actually rated or reviewed as negative, then Steam is going to decide that it's going to recommend that less often, just because it turns out customers aren't that excited about being recommended games that are negatively reviewed. Looking at those reviews is a great opportunity to see what customers are really unhappy about with your game. It may be a mismatch of expectations, so it may just be incorrect in the way that you're describing the game, or the way that you're describing the game is leading customers to believe that they're getting something different than what they get when they play the game. Or it could be some quality control issues or things like that. So, the user reviews are really a great way to read feedback and learn about what players are seeing in your game and what kind of opportunities you have to improve that experience for players. Review bombs are incredibly rare. And this is what we consider a review bomb, is when there's a high volume of reviews posted in a short period of time on a game that doesn't have to do with the quality of the gameplay experience itself. And when that happens, we have a special tool on our end where we can mark those as a review bomb, and it extracts those reviews from the review score. And so then that modified review score then would function the same way that any other review score on Steam does. If after we extract those review bomb reviews, you still have a negatively reviewed game, it'll perform the same way that would happen otherwise. And if extracting those review bomb reviews puts your game back into positive territory, then it would be like any other positively reviewed game on Steam. Moving on to the next question. The question is, some titles were featured on Steam for very different duration compared to others. Are there any parameters affecting this, sales, traffic, etc.? Erik, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in light of kind of what we've already talked about in terms of how Steam works and how the front page works and how featuring works, really, the duration of, let's say if you see a game on Steam and you see it featured prominently for, a long period of time, that's likely because we're getting a strong signal from players that they're really interested in that game, and that they're, really into it, and that they're buying it and they're playing it. When it comes to the other side, which is that, hey, maybe a game isn't featured for very long, or it's or not very much, that might be for a whole different bunch of reasons. And to troubleshoot, if I were to talk to a developer who was feeling like, hey, I was hoping that my game could be featured a little bit more, and how does that work? It might be, to troubleshoot that problem, it might be a number of factors. It could be that you put tags on your game, and actually the tags that you applied to the game aren't really in line with what players would expect to see for this game. And so the game is being shown to the wrong group of players, or to people that actually wouldn't be all that interested in it. It might be that your store page that you've designed isn't capturing the imagination and the interest of the people who are visiting it. Like, they might go to your store page and say, oh, I don't know. I mean, this game isn't really making me excited enough to purchase it, or it's not, or I'm confused about what this game is, and I maybe don't feel confident enough to purchase it because I just don't understand, the game well enough. Or it's possible that you've priced your game too high. Maybe the value of your game, and that it's 40 hours long, and you put all this work into it, but maybe that isn't coming across to the people who are coming to your page, and they don't understand that it's actually worth the extra premium that you've applied to it. So maybe your pricing is wrong. One thing that you can do is you can look at your visibility statistics in Steamworks to see, hey, how many page views did I get? And am I capturing my audience? Am I getting people interested in the game? And there are some changes that you could make to try to adjust that, like changing your capsule art. Capsule art is what we call the artwork that is featured in the store. So, for your game. And it might be that the capsule art for your game is just not very compelling, or it needs to be, or it has too much text, or it's just not exciting enough. And you could try adjusting that and experimenting with different capsule art. You could try redesigning your store page. You could try a bunch of different things to try to generate more interest in your game, and then taking another swing at letting people know about your game and getting the word out about it, and doing everything you can to try to get some more folks to visit your store page. The next question is about wish lists. Alden, there are a number of questions about wish lists and kind of how they work and how they might affect your visibility on Steam, and whether you're going to get featured if you have more wish lists, and how that works. Do you want to just talk generally about wish lists?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there were some questions that kind of alluded to this, and so we thought it was kind of worth going into a little bit more detail on how wish lists work and what the value of wish lists are for your game on Steam. There's no magic number of wish lists that is going to make your game successful or not successful. Really, wish lists are an indication of the awareness that players have for your game. So an indication of how good of a job you've done marketing your game, how good of a job you've done at building excitement and awareness for your game, how just generally aware people are on Steam for your game. Also, in the future, a little bit later on in this talk, we'll talk a little bit about some more ways that you can get more visibility, and especially as you're leading up towards release, events and festivals you can participate in, some tools you can make use of, things like that. So what I'll focus on here is just, what do wish lists mean? It really means that a player is interested in your game. They've clicked a button to say, notify me when this game is released, or notify me when this game goes on a discount in the future. So that player is either your game is not available yet, and you're finding some customers ahead of the release of your game. So you're building up an audience of players that are interested in your game, or after release, people that encounter your game for whatever variety of different reasons, and they're interested in it, but maybe now is not the right time, or maybe they're waiting for it to go on discount and they're really price conscious. So what really the power of wish lists is when you hit the release button, or in the future when you put your game on sale, Steam sends an email to all of those players and lets them know, this game you're interested in is now available, or this game that you're interested in is now on discount. Now is a really good time to jump in and buy it. There are also a couple of other tools we'll talk about later around updates to your game that you can also use to get more visibility in front of those wish listers. But really the value of those wish listers, if they represent legitimate interested customers that are excited to get an email telling them that your game is released or your game is on sale, and they're going to go take some action and buy it and play it and talk to their friends about it, that is the value of acquiring those wish lists. So it's really a way of capturing the interested customers as you are building your audience and building awareness over time, and giving them a place to take an action. And then Steam has automatically the tools to follow up and let those people know that your game is available or your game is on discount. We have looked into a bunch of kind of analysis on, what do wish lists mean in terms of how many sales are they going to result in. It's actually really hard to use wish lists as a prediction of future sales. We found that it's not very reliable. If you plot a graph with how many wish list games have had and how many sales those have been converted into, it's really all over the place. You can draw a line through it, but the number of games that are actually close to that trend is relatively small. And most games are really all over the place. So you can have games that launch with 1,000 wish lists and go on to sell 1 million copies. And you can have games that launch with hundreds of thousands of wish lists and end up selling only a few thousand copies. And a lot of that has to do with what were those players thinking when they added the game to the wish list? What was the context? How excited, how much did they know about the game? How long ago was it? There's so many variables, but it is generally correlated with the more wish lists that you have, means the more excited customers you have, means the more sales you're likely to generate on your game over time. I think that's it. Kaci?
Nice. So we've touched on visibility quite a bit, and I just want to go a little bit deeper into something that we got a question about that is a little bit more specific to that, because really a big part of visibility is creating excuses to talk to your fans and potential players about your game. It can be easy to think that there has to be some sort of big marketing plan and trying to find a way to set it and forget it, but it's really about engagement and giving them an excuse to care about your game, whether it's in development or you're updating it and it's already out, really wherever you are in the life cycle of your project. So one of the questions that we got in relation to this that I want to answer is, what are the best practices for reaching a new audience and building on a current one? The first thing that we always say to this is make an interesting game. And by that, we mean there are lots of interesting games out there. Make an interesting game by starting to make something that you believe in and find interesting. Oftentimes people will say, well, what's the trend? Like, what are the genres that seem to be trending really well right now with players? It doesn't matter. If you make a game that you believe in, that you're excited to build, that you have the resources to build, that you know that you can put your heart and soul into, you'll be able to find an audience for that much more easily than if you are to build a game that you're just doing to follow a trend that you may not quite understand, or maybe you don't believe in it as a gamer yourself. And it's really important that you communicate about that game. And it's easier to communicate if you genuinely like it. You genuinely believe that what you've made is something that people want to play and should play. We mentioned throughout this talk, and we'll touch on a few more later, about all the different tools and features that Steam offers. And it's really not about us telling you, here's the one right way to communicate and build an audience, because there is no right way. But what we do try to do is give you an array. It's like a buffet. Here are some choices, and pick what works for your game, what works for your development process, what makes the most sense for you, and then we can help you with best practices for that. Couple of examples of this. If you pick an approach that works the best for your game and your audience, it might mean setting up a live stream. It might mean doing an event. It might mean setting up early access. It won't necessarily be all of those things. And what is best for you in your game might be different than a developer friend that you have who's working on a game as well. If you do something, and Alden mentioned this earlier, do something that is genuine to you and your process, that applies to communicating and building an audience just as much as it does a game. We've talked to developers before. We had one speaking at a Steamworks virtual conference that we did in April, and she talked a lot about how for her, it was a lot more organic to use the development process as a way to build their audience. So rather than trying to take a step back and come up with this big glossy plan that didn't feel true to who they were, she would take pictures of the process by which they were building the game and then tweet those kind of behind the scenes type things. And for them, they were able to use that to build an audience, and the audience felt like they had a stake in the development of the game. And that made them a little bit more invested in the process. And it ended up kind of evolving into a marketing tool just in that way. So just something to keep in mind. Like, really, it's all about, I'm going to sound like my mother, but be true to yourself and be true to your game. And ultimately, that's what will help you find the most success and find your audience. And I know Alden has a little bit more on visibility in this round. There's a feature that someone asked us about. Can you explain and expand on the start new visibility round feature? How does it affect a game's visibility? And do you have any advice on when and how to use it?
Yeah, so the update visibility round is a specific feature for when you have kind of one of the biggest updates that you're making to your game. And the way that we think about this in terms of updates means generally new content or new fixes or new gameplays or modes in your game that fundamentally make it, give customers a really big reason to come back and play your game again. And so when you have that kind of opportunity, the update visibility round is a button you can push to make your game show up on the homepage of Steam. And it shows up there to people that own your game and people that wishlist your game, letting them know that there's new content in the game, there's something exciting, there's a reason to jump back into that game. So what we know from years of running Steam as a platform is that the power of that network effect means that re-engaging your existing fans, that's going to be the easiest thing, compared to getting new customers. So engaging your existing fans, getting them into your game, getting them excited about it and talking to their friends about it, that will all serve you positively, right? So you ship a big update to your game, use an update round. Also, we've rolled out in the last couple of years a bunch of new communication tools for posting events and scheduling announcements and things like that, all as ways, and those things show up in the Steam library to your players as they're going to figure out what games they want to play tonight. So up at the very top of their Steam library, they see, what's new, and in there is your big update. Well, that gives those fans a reason to jump back into the game. And the more of your players that you're getting to jump back into their game, well, their friends see them launching those games when they're on Steam. So I keep seeing Erik is now playing game such and such. Well, after a while, I'm going to say, well, Erik, why are you playing that game? What's so interesting about that game? Tell me about it. So those positive network effects are really valuable. And that can really, so by engaging your existing fans, you can help build more and more customers and fans, and so forth. So that is a specific feature around update visibility rounds, but it really feeds into the overall communication platform that we've built into Steam and the tools that you can use to post about every kinds of event or news or thing that you have going on in your game that will make your players and prospective players just care about your game again. So you can imagine months after your game is released, you haven't shipped any updates, you haven't added any new content, you're not talking to your customers, there's nothing to say. Well, then when customers are coming and looking at your game and they're trying to decide between your game and maybe some other game that's very similar that has a bunch of life in it and a bunch of vibrance and people talking about it and getting excited about the next season of DLC or just some new character in the game or a new mode that they're trying out, right? It's going to feel a little bit more appealing to some of those customers, at least, to jump into the game that feels a little bit more live and has a community that's active and talking about it. So getting back to what Kaci was saying earlier, you can do this too. And it's not really just needing to have a live service game. You can do this on single player narrative games that don't necessarily lend themselves to big updates all the time, but you can make up reasons to talk to your customers and get them excited about something going on in your game. So you can make up a contest, or you can do a special live stream with somebody fun and interesting that will engage your audience again. So really, I encourage you to spend some time thinking about, after release of your game, what are some of those interesting excuses that you can come up with that will make players care about your game and get excited about it and give them a reason to talk about it and share the news with their friends after release, and kind of plan that out ahead of time. And obviously your plans are going to change and they need to be flexible because you can't predict the future, but at least having an idea going in about what kind of things, maybe there's even some stuff that you don't want to release with your game on day one, and it's more interesting to kind of add it after a month or two because you can turn that into an event and make that exciting for customers. So there's always a delicate balance there of figuring out, you don't want to make sure you want to make sure that your game doesn't feel like it's missing something and then you add that thing later, like you've withheld something. But it is worth kind of thinking about what that drumbeat of news and interesting things are going to be after the release of your game. There are a few other features on Steam. We were sort of just talking about communication in general and how you can use Steam to connect with your players. There's a few other features just in terms of building an audience, building a community. After the release of your game, putting your game on discount is going to be a big thing that you're going to want to pay attention to over time. participating in seasonal sales that Steam is operating, plus just running your own discounts on your game from time to time. That can have a big effect of re-engaging your existing fans, especially if you have a game that a bunch of people are excited to play with other people or talk with other people about. That might help. But it'll also, the people that have your game on your wish list and they're waiting for maybe a discount on the game, that's a great way to capture their attention. And putting your game on discount also allows it to show in more different places across Steam. We have a bunch of dedicated discounted sections on Steam Store. And so that will just allow your game to show up in more places by doing that. I think those are the main points that I thought were worth making around there. Casey?
Yeah, well, speaking of discounts, this is a good transition into, we've touched on events here and there, and Alden was just talking about discounts. And we did get some more specific questions on best practices for discounts, other tips for running events and things of that nature. So Erik is going to get us started with that.
Sure, it helps to unmute myself. So when it comes to discounts, I think I'll talk a little bit from the very beginning of your game's life cycle, like all the way through to kind of the later on your sales decay curve. So at the very beginning, I actually got a question like this from a developer just today, asking me, hey, should we run a launch discount for our game? Because that would be the very first time that you would decide whether or not to run a discount on your game. And honestly, the answer to a launch discount is it really depends on the game. There are developers on Steam who really believe in launch discounts as giving you a little bit of an edge and getting people to think more about purchasing your game. And then there are developers who think that that you don't want to discount your game at exactly the very beginning of your game, and that you want it to feel like a full value. And honestly, when it comes to what we see, and we don't have a magic eye in terms of what is the best thing, because there are too many variables. There are too many types of games on Steam. There are so much variety and so much diversity when it comes to game on Steam. But that might be the very first time that you would think about whether or not you want to discount your game and how you discount your game. And our ultimate, we don't have a best practice when it comes to a launch discount. That's ultimately up to you and kind of what strategy you want to employ. But when it comes to discounting, the one thing that we do suggest is to stair step your discount, which is a way of saying that you don't want to start with a really deep discount. Like, we wouldn't recommend starting with like a 40% launch discount and then quickly going to 70% off in your very first other discount. And the reason for that is you want to leave room for additional discounts, as your game ages over time. And that's that stair step. You want to kind of go deeper in discounts over a period of time, kind of slowly, and time your discounts. Most importantly, I think when I consistently look at things and I see the biggest impact, it's when you time your discount to a major content update or a major event or something happening in your game, and being able to time, I'm going to hit 50% off for the very first time on my game at the same time that I'm having a major content update, and that's going to double, kind of like double the interest and get lots of people interested in my game, at that moment. And that might be that burst of customer interest in your game that Steam picks up on and suggests the game to other people, and there can be a snowball effect, from that. But ultimately, we recommend that kind of, get to your deeper discounts over time and really take your sales decay curve into account when you look at that. And a sales decay curve is that natural progression of, higher sales to lower sales over time as your game naturally ages. And remember, when you are discounting, don't just discount your base game. Also think about discounting any other packages if you have any, like deluxe editions or anything else, DLC. It also helps to just have everything on sale at the same time so that a customer, when they're landing on your page, might want to pick everything up at the same time. So that's generally our best practice when it comes to discounting. The next question is for Alden, and that is about Steam events, which is something that you actually worked on, Alden, and know better than really anyone. And the question is, can we organize our own Steam events? And if yes, how? How do you organize a Steam event?
Yeah, so we've built a lot of tools to support running more and more special events on Steam. And as a result, we've been able to run more and more of these, and we've been able to help other outside parties, such as different regions or different event organizers, be able to host some kind of event on Steam. Sometimes those events take the form of they're just a sale of a collection of games. Sometimes they are more of a festival feeling, and they have live streams that are organized and maybe keynote speeches and things like that. It can be a variety of different things. Some examples that might come to mind. Usually every year when there's PAX running, in fact, I think there's one up now that there's a sale page, and it lists out the games that are participating in PAX. There's also other kinds of sales. Maybe somebody that runs a publisher and has a number of games, they can organize those games together on a sale page and run their own publisher weekend. There's also something you might have seen where we run regional or themed sales. So there's been kind of the Swiss developer sales or the Montreal developer sales, collecting together a bunch of games made in a certain region and promoting that as a place where those games come from. We think those are really interesting. I think that adds a bunch of kind of humanity to game development and helps players kind of understand who makes these games, where are they, what are these interesting places that games are coming out of. So if you guys wanted to organize something like that, we would be happy to work with you on that. The way that those usually go is somebody from your organization, somebody maybe from your local game developer association, or maybe Chris or Sarah that helped organize this session, kind of wrangling, who are all the developers that would like to participate in that, which games, and then, coming up with some cool art that represents who are you, as developers from Indonesia, what is unique about your industry there or your culture in general. And so, yeah, we're happy to kind of help organize that and work with you on timing and the tools to be able to put together and manage that sale page as well. I think I actually answered 2 questions at once there. So did I cover everything, Casey, Erik?
I think you did.
I think so.
Great.
Yeah, I think, and you even mentioned PAX, which is great, because the next bit I was just going to add on is that we work with external event organizers quite often, and that means that we end up posting a companion page on Steam. Gamescom's another example, E3. And then we, of course, host our own events in addition to the regular sales that you see. You may have heard of Steam Next Fest, which is a great way for developers to reach an audience before they launch their game officially by releasing a demo, and you can get actual real-time feedback from an audience and reach them that way. And it's interesting because we're just going to keep repeating the theme. When it comes to best practices, there is no one right answer for everyone. We're really not in the business of telling people like, you have to do it this way, or it's not the right way to do it. That being said, there are some best practices when it comes to the best ways to take full advantage of the tools that we do offer. So no matter what tool it is that you decide is best for you in your game, we definitely have some tips and best practices on that. And for Erik, the first question we got on that is any advice that we might have for an indie game dev who just released their first game on Steam?
Oh, I have not just one piece. I have so much advice because there's a lot to think about. Releasing your first game on Steam is a big deal, and whoever it is out there that asks this question, congratulations, that's awesome. But the first thing that I would do if I were a developer that just released my first game is to figure out who is playing my game. Who is my audience? Who is out there that is leaving a review for me, is in my community hub, maybe is reaching out to me on other social media. Maybe that's Discord or Twitter or Facebook. However people are reaching out to you, learn about your players and try to understand who they are and what their needs are and how they feel about the game. I would say be as open to feedback as you possibly can and be ready to iterate and to fix bugs and to make new features and do whatever you can to adjust to this group of people that has suddenly kind of latched onto your game and has invested their money into your game. And I think that's a beautiful thing and a great thing. I would also think about marketing. Hopefully, before the launch of your game, you were already thinking about marketing. And if there is one piece of advice I like to give to developers who are releasing their first game on Steam or their third or fifth, whatever it is that make sure that you are getting the word out about your game well in advance. And because the way that Steam works is, as I mentioned, again, it is really reacting to a burst of customer activity. And that burst of customer activity most often happens at the launch of your game, because that's when people are getting wish list emails. That's when they're finding out about your game. Maybe you did a big social media push and you let everybody know that your game's coming out. But it doesn't have to happen then. And let's say that you didn't get a chance to do that. You were busy working on your game. You were working so hard to try to get it out, and you didn't have a chance to actually tell people that your game is coming. And maybe the sales of your game at the start reflect that. Like, people don't really know about your game. They don't know anything about it. It's still worth doing the work to let people know about your game. And so then the work begins of, how do I market my game? How am I telling people about it? How am I getting the word out? And I think that marketing mentality should start before your game is launched, but even afterwards should be through the whole life cycle of your game. At every beat, every update, every content push, every event that's happening in your game. Maybe you're running a tournament, whatever it is, you can use Steam events and other tools that we provided to try to get the word out about what's happening in your game. Another thing I would recommend is rewinding back, if you haven't already launched your game, is get a coming soon page up for your game as soon as possible. As soon as you feel like you have something to show to customers, because without a coming soon page, customers don't have a place to land when they're searching for your game on Steam. They don't have a way for you to direct customers to, and ultimately, and most importantly, they don't have a way to wish list your game. And you want to capture those wish lists. And that's the reason why you want to have that coming soon page up early, because those wish lists, of course, will be valuable when you come to launch your game. And that's because, again, every time you launch a game, an email is going to get sent to those customers. And then anytime that you have a discount of 20% or greater, they will also get an email. So those wish lists are really valuable. You want to get your coming soon page up as early as possible. You also want to communicate as much as possible, obviously not needlessly, but with valuable content, but just telling your customers about what you're working on, what you're doing. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that it helps reassure people that are already bought your game, what you're working on, what content you're adding, how you're adjusting to bugs, whatever you're doing in the game. But it also signals to people who are looking at purchasing your game on the store page and elsewhere, they understand that the game is alive, that things are happening, that there are events happening, that you're working on the latest features. They can sense that, and they can see that on your store page thanks to Steam events, and that might impact their purchase decision or be interested in buying the game. And ultimately, we really recommend trying to coordinate everything. As I mentioned, coordinating a discount with a big push on marketing, with letting people know about what's happening in your game. Maybe you're at a trade show. Maybe you're talking to a bunch of people in your town. Whatever it is that you can do to try to make everything happen at the same time as a discount, whatever it is. The more you can coordinate things, the better results. We would think that you would have. So those are all advice that I would give. But the number one thing I would say is, be prior to the launch of your game, just try to get the word out about your game and let people know what's happening. So the next question we have is for Alden, and this is, what do we need to know as a developer when releasing on multiple platforms, Steam, mobile, and on consoles? Is there anything we need to know about that might affect the way we market our games on Steam?
Yeah, it's useful to think when you're planning out your launch plan and kind of what consoles or platforms you're going to target. Think about what resources you have as a developer or developer studio, and think and be realistic about what you can actually accomplish. It can be really, really challenging to launch a game on multiple platforms at exactly the same time. Just logistically, trying to get approval to ship on all the platforms at the same time, but also from a technical standpoint, trying to fix bugs and make sure that it's a good experience on all of those platforms at the same time can be a really big challenge. Having said that, I think there are some benefits to launching simultaneously on multiple platforms. You get to kind of take advantage of any buzz and news that is written about any of those your game on any of those different platforms. And that all helps give players choice about where they want to buy and play your game. So there are benefits to launching that way, but I think ultimately you really have to be reasonable about what you can accomplish as a developer or a studio. And if you're going to be stretching yourself too thin, trying to launch at the same time on multiple platforms, and you're going to end up shipping a buggy game on 2 of the 3 platforms, you probably, it would be worth delaying that release and actually shipping a really good experience on one platform and then moving on to the next platform and shipping there. Generally speaking, Steam has a pretty lightweight review process as you're getting ready to release your game. It's nothing as rigorous as like certification for the consoles. It's really just, we want to make sure that your game is configured correctly, is set up, it's going to run when players hit the launch button. We know that the Steamworks backend tools can be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing. They're incredibly powerful tools, but they're also not the most user-friendly necessarily. So we have part of our review process is just making sure that you've gotten your game set up properly, and when players hit the launch button, it's going to do the right thing. And then also just, you know, a few things just to make sure that it looks like what is described on the store page, and our team will offer some suggestions about, hey, maybe you want to think about controller support. Looks like this game would likely support that pretty well. When you're thinking about different platforms, especially if you maybe have been traditionally developing for mobile and now you're thinking about deploying a PC game, but also this is, I guess, the same is true if you're thinking about developing on console as well. Think about the context that your player is going to be playing the game. Make sure that the controls that those players are going to be using make sense. So if you're moving from a mobile game and making that same game for PC, you want to make sure that you have good keyboard and mouse control support, because that's what players are going to be expecting. You also want to make sure that you can support, you know, big HD resolution. Make sure it doesn't look like a mobile screen pasted into the middle of somebody's PC monitor. So make sure that the game feels native and well adjusted for the platform and the context that those players are going to be playing that game. And it's worth, you know, spending a little bit of time to make sure that that feels like a really native, natural experience for those players. Moving on to the next question. Erik, do you have any tips? When is a good time, season, months to release a game? Is any better or worse than another?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Also, I should mention we are low on time, so I'm going to go do speed round. I'm going to get through a bunch of questions as quickly as possible. So first, the answer is there a best time to release your game? The answer is no. Actually, we don't really think that there's any better or worse time to launch a game. I would not worry too much about that. I would try to launch your game when you think it's ready and when you think the time is right. The only thing that I would say is it's probably not a good idea to launch your game in the middle of a big sale, like the summer sale or the winter sale. Other than that, just because the store is going to be so taken up by everything that's happening in the sale. But outside of that, I would say release the game when you think it's ready. Next question is about Steam keys. And the question is, we see Steam keys sold on other digital platforms. Can we also sell them on other digital platforms? The answer to that is yes. Yeah, you can. That's what Steam keys are designed to be used for. However, I'm going to post a quick link here to our documentation. I would just suggest reading through this documentation, understanding it. This explains kind of our Steam key policy and how we think about Steam keys. The next question is, do you have any advice on how we should decide to price our game and how we should decide on regional pricing? I'll tackle the first question first. I would just educate yourself as much as possible about other types of games that are similar on Steam, other types of games that have a similar value, to your game in the sense of replayability and content and just everything about your game. Ultimately, nobody knows your game better than you, and you would have a good idea of what appropriate pricing is. But just keep an eye towards value. You want your customers to feel like they're getting a good value for their money, and that they're having a good experience for that money, because then they're more likely to suggest it and to have more people to play it. The next thing I would say is you can also keep an eye on your wish list numbers after you have launched. If you launch your game and you have priced it at a certain price and your wish list conversions aren't great, it might be that you have charged too much for your game and that your price is a little bit too high. That might be something to keep an eye on, to think about. The last question is, how should we decide on regional pricing? Ultimately, that's up to you. And I should mention, all pricing is up to you. We don't, Valve and Steam, we don't set pricing. So it's up to developers to decide their own pricing. When it comes to regional pricing, we do have suggested regional pricing that we provide for you. And that is based off of research that we do on the purchasing power of various countries, and it's a suggestion that we provide. We think we're giving you good advice, but ultimately you don't have to use it. It's up to you to decide. But we do provide that as a service to Steam developers. Seems like the last question that we're going to be able to hit here, looking at the time, and I know that this is a big topic, is Alden. The question is, do you have any tips on deciding whether a game should be released for early access? And generally, like I would say, do you have any best practices on early access, Alden?
Yeah, we have a bunch of best practices, and maybe in the interest of time, we will just paste that documentation link into the chat. Eric, could you do that? I'm going to talk a little bit about,
I will do that.
At a high level, early access. What is it? How might that work best for your game? Early access really is just a framework of messaging to help players understand that your game is still a work in progress, and to give you a dedicated space to explain to those customers, what is the current state of the game? Where am I generally headed with this game? Where do we think it might be in the future? And how do we want to hear from you? What kind of feedback do we want to hear from you as a player? So there's a set of questions that you answer as you set up for early access, and it'll kind of walk you through answering those questions for customers so that they understand what to expect when they get your game and they start playing it. The thing I think the question was trying to get at is, are there certain games maybe that don't make sense or make less sense for early access? I think the games that make the most sense for early access are the ones that are really replayable, and that you as a developer can ship a part of your gaming experience, part of the gameplay loop. Players then can experience that, give you feedback, and you can take that feedback into the next iteration or the next map of your game or the next level, and be able to keep expanding on that in a way that those players are going to be interested to come back and continue playing the game and enjoying those refinements as you make them, and enjoying the new content as you make them. If you make a game that is like a single player narrative experience, and players generally would be interested in playing through it once and then be done with it, that may not lend itself as well to early access. You may end up getting that game in front of players in an unfinished state. Those players play through it once, and then they're not that interested in coming back again in the future. So you may want to think about, what is the experience for customers? Are they going to want to keep coming back and playing my game after I ship updates and add new content to it? If the answer to that is yes, then it's probably a good fit for early access. If the answer is, well, players are probably going to play it once, and either they play it in a buggy, unfinished state, and then they don't have that great of an experience, or I want to wait until it's fully released and release that, and those players are going to have a great experience playing through it the one time that they played through it. So I think that is really kind of the useful question to ask yourself, and the way to make that decision about whether it's right for early access or not. And then, of course, check out the documentation that Eric linked in the chat. There's a lot of best practices and kind of thoughts about how best to set up communication with players and things like that.
Cool. Well, we're running up a little bit on our time. So right now, I want to ask if anybody has any questions in the chat. If there's anything we haven't really covered, or something that came up as a question that we talked about, now would be the time to enter it into chat. I'll stall for you to give people a chance to think of them, just in case, by letting you know that, again, if there is a question that you have that's specific to you as an individual developer or your game, we are always happy to work with you on that. And the best way to reach us is through the Steamworks page, and creating a ticket. There's a button labeled support at the top of the page. And by creating a ticket, that just ensures that we can get your question to the person on our team that can answer it the best and work with you the best. It actually goes to us. It's not some outsourced team of any kind, but we're always super happy to work with people on that. There it is. Chris, how can we get dev kits for Steam Deck? A fantastic question. And we are going to have information on that soon. I'm just pausing in case my coworkers are.
Yes, we are going to have information on that soon. We're going to share more. So stay tuned for more information, and we'll be releasing that not in secret. We're going to let everybody know at the same time when we're ready to roll that out. So stay tuned. Alden, I think there was a quick question that you wanted to touch on. Do you want to cover that real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, either way. There was a question, I actually touched a little bit on this early on. There were some questions about Indonesia as a region. And the question really was, it's been a while since Steam added support for the, how do you say it, Rupa? The local currency there, sorry. Is there a lot of sales from Indonesian market? How many players from Indonesia? Some kind of questions around that. There were some more specific questions around kind of what genre do players play from Indonesia. I'm not going to go super deep on what Indonesian players like, because as I said at the beginning of the session, we think of Steam as a platform, as a global platform, and you really should also think about your customers as speaking all kinds of different languages and living in different countries all over the world. So you're not just building games for Indonesian customers, you're building games for a global audience. Indonesia, frankly, is still quite a small region for Steam. I just looked at a couple months of data and it was 38th overall, which sounds very small compared to how big of a country you are in terms of population. We are very interested to hear more about what can we do better to better support customers in Indonesia. Are there payment methods we need to support? I know language is going to be a big barrier, so maybe that is probably something that we need to prioritize, adding the ability for games to list Indonesian language support and be able to have customers run Steam in that language as well. Yeah, we don't really have a deep study that we've done on Indonesia as a region, but we would love to hear from you all about kind of what we can do better in terms of supporting customers there and getting more audience and attraction from your local gamers and from yourselves as well.
We're running out of time here, but there's just two quick questions from the chat that we can jump into. I'll answer one of them, and then I'm going to throw one of them at you, Alden. The first question is there any way to notify wish listers by ourselves as a developer and giving them a notification or an email? Because in their case, they're saying that, because not everyone who bought our game on day one who had wishlisted it, and is there a way for me to get a hold of them, in touch with them? The answer is no. There's no way for developers to individually email all of their wishlisters. But remember that isn't just done when your game is launched. An automatic email is generated when your game is discounted at 20% or greater. So the next time that you discount your game at 20% or greater, they will also receive another email letting them know that your game is on sale because you have wishlisted it. So that is a way for you to get in touch, with that audience. The next question is, I'm just going to paraphrase it here because it's a fairly long question, but it's just about events on Steam, things like Next Fest or other kind of regional sales or things like, kind of curated events or events that are organized by outside organizations or developers. Alden, can you talk a little bit about the types of events on Steam and how developers might be involved in some of that stuff, like, for example, Next Fest and other events?
Yeah, we've run a number of the Steam Next Fest festivals. I think we've run kind of 4 major ones of those, and we're just about to announce the next one that's coming in October. That is really an opportunity for you as a game developer with an unreleased game to get a playable demo in front of fans and give them a chance to get hands-on with your game, gather feedback from them, get them to wishlist your game if they're excited about it. We definitely plan to continue doing those for the foreseeable future. Seems like there's really strong interest from players to play demos and check out games in that way. There's a lot of strong interest from developers to have that mechanism for getting more visibility and more awareness ahead of release. So that is one example of a kind of event that we're very much interested in hosting and organizing on Steam. In general, we think those kinds of special events, whether they're organized by us, like the Next Fest, or organized by outside organizations like PAX or whatever your local Indonesia game developer conference is, those are the kinds of events that we think are pretty interesting to run on Steam, and that give players kind of an interesting reason to care about a set of games and to surface them in front of players again. So we're always open to suggestions for different kinds of events, sales, things like that. So feel free to reach out to us and propose an idea and be willing to work with us on helping organize it. And we'd love to hear those ideas.
And one thing to add to that is at the end of this question is there a plan for Valve to make events like these that appear on the front page of Steam more common and more accessible to smaller devs? One of the things that we do is in addition to events that are organized by outside organizations and events that are specific to kind of something that happening maybe like at PAX or something else. Valve, we also run our own kind of curated genre sales. We recently ran an open world sale. We've run a fighting game sale. We tabletop games. Oftentimes we will have genre sales that will appeal to a certain type of gamer and a certain type of genre. And those sales are always open to all developers on Steam that have a game of that particular type. So we don't differentiate between big and small developers. Everyone who has a game that is in that genre is welcome to participate, and we will continue to do those. I'm seeing lots of feedback, Alden, about the Bahasa Indonesia and Indonesian language. That's some feedback that we can take back with us. It sounds like that's pretty critical for folks in Indonesia. I think we're just about out of time. Casey, was there anything else that you wanted to kind of close with?
No. I'll just reiterate that the best way to reach out to us individually is through Steamworks and the support button. And again, that ticket goes to us as a team. It doesn't go to anybody else. So just reiterating the theme of this whole event, which is just that we love working with developers and hearing what works and what doesn't, and trying our best to continue to make our tools and features even better for the process that you're all going through. So we're just really appreciative of your time and hope we get to do this again sometime soon and get to do it in person.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And thank you for Chris and Sarah for helping organize this and pull this all together. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to say, we genuinely appreciate everybody showing up and asking questions and being a part of the discussion. And we really do value your feedback and your questions, and it helps us to improve Steam and to make it better for you. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so